Welcome to the Empowered Wife Podcast, where it's all about fixing your relationship without your man's conscious effort so that you feel desired and taken care of and special, even if your relationship feels completely hopeless. I'm Laura Doyle, and today I'm talking about 2 steps to bring back the sizzle, even if you're not feeling it. Almost every conversation my guest Erica had with her husband was an argument that included threats, name calling, swearing, and occasional physical altercations. They separated, but today he has moved back and they are happier together than they've ever been. They laugh together and she gets huge hugs from her man. She's going to describe exactly what she did to save her marriage and make it terrific, along with her best tip for wives who want to fix their marriages too. And then I'll be giving out the Worst Relationship Advice of the Week award, which is a great way to make a problem in your relationship when there isn't one. If you need drama, you can find it with this popular advice. All of that is coming up, but first let's talk about 2 steps to bring back the sizzle, even if you're not feeling it, and even if you're not in love with your husband. When you're first falling in love, it's like you're temporarily insane, isn't it? I mean, you didn't even notice things like his bad breath or that he has sports channels playing all the time or he slurps his cereal. But years into marriage, you not only notice unattractive things about him, you may have completely lost sight of whatever it was that you originally saw in him. I mean, why did you marry this guy anyway? Maybe he's put on weight, or he spends all his spare time on the couch, or he's too harsh with the kids. All of that takes a toll on how you feel about him. And you don't want to admit it out loud, but maybe you search Google for some kind of answer because this is not the marriage you envisioned and you want to know your options, maybe even your escape route. I mean, you wish you could admire your husband and feel excited about him, but how can you if you're feeling repulsed? Well, here are 2 ways to make your man more exciting and bring back that loving feeling. Number 1 is to drop and do 10 gratitudes, that is. So Jasmine felt the same way about her husband, Aladdin. You know, the guy seemed exciting and resourceful in the beginning, but, he had a genie and all that. But now they had 3 kids and a busy work week, and she was just not so enamored with that pet monkey. The idea of taking a family of 5 somewhere on a magic carpet, totally impractical. Why couldn't he just get safe transportation like normal husbands? Can you relate to this? At the end of her rope, Jasmine was ready to do something drastic, and she dragged Al to marriage counseling, where the therapist affirmed that she was a good spouse and Aladdin was just off in la la land. Unfortunately, that didn't give Jasmine what she really wanted, which was to feel special, to feel safe, to have a husband she admired. Jasmine wished she were married to someone more practical and down to earth, and suddenly she was. Without warning, Aladdin turned into a different man. There was no sign of the monkey, and instead of a magic carpet, he drove a sensible sedan. And rather than dreaming about the future, he was always looking at the accounting software. At first, Jasmine was so relieved that her husband was finally doing what she thought he should have been doing all along. But it wasn't long before Jasmine missed the adventurous man she had married. She regretted taking his playfulness for granted and wondered where her fearless husband had gone. Sure, life was more predictable and less chaotic, but it wasn't as exhilarating or interesting as it had been. Jasmine realized she'd been taking her husband's good qualities for granted just because she lived with him. Familiarity had bred contempt. Beside herself with regret, Jasmine wanted to undo her wish, and the genie gave her the formula to do just that, is to drop and do 10 gratitudes for her husband. What did you appreciate about Al? The genie asked. Jasmine listed all the things she'd fallen in love with: his sense of humor, his willingness to sacrifice for his family, his strength, his ability to create magic, and on until she had at least 10 things she loved about Al. And just like that, he was back. the man she'd fallen in love with returned. So, this is obviously a fictionalized scenario, but it's one I've seen play out many times with my students. To get back to feeling in love with your man, why not drop and do 10 gratitudes for him? You had plenty of good reasons to marry him. What are they? Step number 2, relinquish control of his decisions. I have a world famous system for relinquishing control of your husband, which I've been practicing for years, but sometimes I'm still tempted to tell my husband, John, what to do. Like one time when he had the chance to get a big client for his business, and I thought he should jump on it, but he didn't. And I couldn't understand why he would pass up that additional income. I'm not proud to say, I wondered if he was just too lazy to jump through the hoops to get the gig. A few days later, John reminded me that the person he would be working with was very difficult at times, and he wasn't excited to answer to that person. From my standpoint, it seemed so easy. Just get this shiny new client and make lots of money. But from John's perspective, the new client was going to be a pain. It's something he didn't really want in his life. And then I felt admiration for my husband, who he didn't want to kowtow to an overbearing honcho. And that struck me as masculine strength and confidence, which I find attractive. All of a sudden, I thought it was sexy that he wasn't going for that client. Letting your husband make decisions for himself without weighing in or advising him can help you remember what you liked about this guy back in the day. If you'd like to be my guest on the Empowered Wife podcast and share about how you fixed a struggling relationship using the 6 intimacy skills, I would love to interview you. Just go to lauradoyle.org/podcast-guest to let me know that you are willing to make a big contribution to ending world divorce by telling your relationship story. I look forward to meeting you. That's lauradoyle.org/podcast-guest. Almost every conversation my guest Erica had with her husband was an argument that included threats, name-calling, swearing, and even occasional physical altercations. Her husband told her he hated her and threatened divorce many times, and so did she. Depression, anxiety, and even threats of suicide came up. They separated. But today, he has moved back and they are happier together than they've ever been. They laugh together and she gets huge hugs from her man. He also gave her a diamond and sapphire wedding band for their 5th anniversary. She's going to describe exactly what she did to save her marriage and make it terrific, along with her best tip for wives who want to fix their marriages too. Erica, welcome to the Empowered Wife podcast. Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Laura. It's awesome to be here.
So take us back to the battle days. What were things like in your marriage?
Oh man. Well, we married really young, and just some backstory from me. I came from a very physically and emotionally and mentally abusive home, mostly from my mother. And so that kind of bled into our marriage, those problems and those mental blocks came into our marriage too. And so when I married him, I felt like he was going to fix me. And I feel like that's a lot of what women experience, is that we think that marriage is just going to be this happily ever after, which it can be if you have the right skills. But whereas I came from such a broken home that it just felt so, I don't know, it wasn't great. So we fought a lot. We had a lot of arguments. We were just completely different people than I had even realized. And yeah, it was just such a struggle to even get one point across without somebody getting offended or somebody yelling at the other person. And it was a lot of struggle and a lot of heartache.
And it makes sense that because of the modeling you had and you were so hopeful that this relationship was gonna fix you. So it sounds like it was probably extra disappointing that it wasn't fixing you. Is that fair
Yeah,
to say?
it was very disappointing, to say the least. And I just felt like I couldn't get a leg up. I just felt like I was so behind on just like knowing what a good marriage looks like because it was never modeled for me. It was, my mom's way or the highway. And my dad worked all the time to try and provide for her and have enough money, and it just was never enough. And so that's kind of how I went into my marriage, was feeling never enough. And then when my marriage wasn't working, it just made me feel even worse. So it wasn't a great environment to start a family in.
Yeah. And there were some issues with anxiety and depression and things like that going on.
Yes, yeah. Um, I have had depression I would say probably since middle school or high school. And then eventually I was led to a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. And that's just a lot of black and white thinking, a lot of extremes, and even some suicidal tendencies. And that first manifested itself in high school. And then, yeah, it just kept getting worse in my marriage. And yeah, I had been on medication. I'd gone through several different counselors, and it just didn't feel like it wasn't a long term fix. It was more of a short term band aid patch up job. So it didn't really feel like it was helping all that much,
Mm.
especially in my marriage.
And I remember from my own days of incessant fighting how draining that was emotionally too. So this was kind of putting even more pressure on you, and you were feeling like like life was pretty hard to cope with to begin with, it sounds like.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. My first suicide attempt was in high school, and then it just kept getting worse. So, yeah, I've had to be hospitalized a few times. There was one time in particular that I'm thinking of. My husband and I were just in a huge fight, and eventually things led to where my husband had to call the police, and I had to be taken to a hospital in the back of a police car. And that was like an all-time low for me. It just felt like I had my daughter at the time too. And it just felt like I couldn't even be trusted to take care of myself. And I had this infant, and I had this husband who was sobbing on the way to the hospital and sobbing in the waiting room, and just like, how did we get here? How did it get so bad? And they eventually had to take me to a mental institution, and I had to stay there for a few days. And that was just like the loneliest feeling, because I had this tiny 6-month-old or 9-month-old baby, and I couldn't even feed her or anything. And I couldn't see her. And yeah, it was just, I knew that if I kept letting these mental problems persist, that I would not be able to raise my daughter the way that I wanted to, and I wouldn't be able to have the happy marriage that I wanted.
Ugh, sounds very painful, heartbreaking. So, and at the time, were you thinking, well, my husband's making this worse. He's making me crazy, right? I mean,
Yes,
what
yeah,
about that?
I definitely thought he was the problem for sure. And I even had people telling me that he was the problem, well meaning people who I care about and who I love, but who just, they just didn't want me to be in pain anymore. And so that's what they were trying to do, is like, well, he's the source of your pain, so then cut him out. And some of it rang true to me, just because at the time it's easier to blame someone else than yourself, or look at yourself and see what your problems are. But yeah, it was hard, because it felt like I was just all alone in this, and that I really wanted to make things work, but everyone was telling me this isn't the way that it should be, and you need to get out and figure your own life out for yourself, because this isn't healthy.
Right. So, what were some of the things that at the time seemed like he was doing wrong, that he was made him such a bad person to be
He
with?
was very withdrawn emotionally and physically at times. He'd play lots of video games, and that's just like his escape. He would work longer, he'd stay longer at work, he'd take shifts on the weekends. He wouldn't talk to me about anything of like substance. And there were really good months, and then there were just really bad ones where we
Mhm.
just couldn't even, he would sleep on the couch, and I would sleep on the couch sometimes. And so it was just this cold war for so long, and it was just always up and down. And I never have had anything in my life be stable, and that's like the one thing I was looking forward to, was like, I get to make that choice. I get to choose who I marry, and I get to choose how my marriage is going to look like, and that's going to be my stability in life. And then when I got there, and it was just as roller coastery as my adolescent years, it was a pretty big letdown.
So was there a moment when you said, "Well, we can't go on like this," like that?
Yes, I there were several of those moments. We were separated several times, several times. This last time was like the final, just like, this has to stop. We can't do this anymore. We're abusing each other, and we don't feel like we're accepted the way that we are, and we're not happy. And so we both just said, let's just, before we do any more damage to ourselves or our daughter, let's just call it quits, and just try and figure out life on our own. And so, yeah, so he left, he moved in with his parents, and I was in the apartment, and we were trying to make plans to live apart for a while. And yeah, it was really hard.
Yeah, crushing. So what happened?
I stumbled upon, I had been thinking about it and praying about it. I'm a very religious person. And I was praying about it, and I was like, you know what? I really don't feel like I have given everything that I can to this marriage. I really don't feel like I've done everything that I can. And so I was Googling one night, several different nights, but this night in particular, I was Googling how to get your husband to move back, something like that, after a separation. And the Laura Doyle blog post page came up for that exact topic. And I read it, and it really resonated with me. And I took those steps that were outlined in that blog post to try and get him to come back, taking care of myself and making myself happy, and also being more respectful and being grateful. Every little thing that he would do, he would, pay for certain bills and things. And I would just gush and gush about how grateful I was that he could do that, and that he would do that for me and our daughter. And yeah, just like little text messages throughout the day saying hello, and just being playful, and sending a funny video every now and again. So that's kind of what I started to do.
How did he respond to that?
At first, I think he felt like it was a manipulation tactic to try and get him to come back. Like, I had realized that life was going to be a lot harder without him, financially. And so I think that's what he initially felt. But later, he started to come around, because we do have that connection. We do still love each other. It doesn't just end just because you're separated. We still love each other. And we had a 3-year-old together. And so we would have to see each other to kind of switch off. And so he would come over, and he'd start staying longer. And then sometimes he would stay overnight. So it seemed like it started to kind of help and change the situation. He would soften his heart a little bit more, and he'd start to open up to me, and I would just listen. I wouldn't, agree or disagree. I would just listen, and I hear you, and I love you, and I'm sorry that really sucks. And, just trying to empathize with how he was feeling, because he is more withdrawn than I am. I always have people that I can turn to vent to and to talk to. And he doesn't really feel comfortable doing that with anybody but someone who's really close to, usually his mom or me. So, and I was cut out completely, and he didn't want to talk to his mom at that point because he was living with her. So, yeah, it was, I think it was good for him to be able to vocalize those feelings and thoughts.
So it sounds like you created emotional safety that
Hmm.
maybe hadn't been there for him before.
Yeah. Yeah. It's looking back now, I feel so bad for how I treated him and just the things that I said and did. We both made mistakes, but focusing on what I could change rather than focusing on his flaws and his things that he needed to change was definitely a huge eye opener for me. I'd always heard the phrase that I couldn't control anyone but myself,
Mm-hmm.
but I never really took that to heart. I didn't really know what that meant. I thought that all of the things I was doing were being helpful and being, responsible, and it wasn't helpful. It was ultimately it just ended in disrespect, and that's why he was so closed off to me for so long.
Yeah, I love that. I relate to that. I remember I heard the same thing. Can't control anyone but yourself. But what does that mean? Does that mean I just have to suck it up and suffer forever because he never cleans up after himself, or he,
Yeah.
yeah, is not paying attention to me? I don't
Yeah.
understand. So yeah. So was there a moment when you said, okay, this approach that I'm taking, this new approach, this is working?
Yeah. Eventually it came time. He has a brother and a sister in law, and they were moving into their own house. And so they were transitioning from one house to another, and they needed to stay somewhere for a couple weeks. So they moved into his parents' house as well. And they have 3 kids. So they needed all the available space that they could for just those couple weeks. And so Tyler had to kind of find somewhere else to live. And so he finally came back to me and he said, "Hey, things are still not like 100% where I want them to be. And I do miss you and I do love you. Would it be okay with you if I came back home?" And I just jumped on. I was like, "Yes, yes, absolutely, 100%. Please come back home. We miss you." And he was still wary because we'd gone through this cycle so many times before. He didn't want to get sucked back in and then just have it go downhill again. And so he did come back. He was still a little wary, but eventually, a few months passed and my birthday came up and he wanted to get me a Nintendo Switch, which I've wanted for a long time. I grew up with Nintendo games and they're just so fun. So I had wanted that for a long time. And he took the initiative and was calling around and seeing who had it available. And, we picked it up together and I was so excited and he was so excited and he just was happy to share that with me. And he spoiled me on my birthday. He took me out to dinner and to breakfast. And it was probably one of the best birthdays I've ever had. So it was really special.
Wow, this doesn't sound like a man who's distant.
Mm-mm, no, it just, like I said, I didn't know what a good marriage even looked like or how to even start. And so when I picked up the Empowered Wife and the Surrendered Wife, and I read both of them, and I just soaked it all up, and I put the 6 intimacy skills on my mirror, and I put them in my phone, and I saved them as my screensaver on my phone and on my computer. And I just felt like this is the answer I was looking for, and I just thank God that I found it because it just has changed my life drastically.
Wow, amazing. So, and it can take some energy, some focus to put those intimacy skills into practice, right? Simple, but not always.
Yeah, I think for me, it was a lot easier to put them into practice. It was a little counterintuitive at first. For a long time, I had done what I thought was like, uh, I felt like I was doing too much, that I was spreading myself too thin. And I was, making all of his doctor's appointments for him and making sure he knew where he was supposed to be and at what time. And And I was doing all this micromanaging and it just stressed me out to no end. And I finally was able to let those things go and be like, you know what? It's not my life. This is his life. And my life is, I need to focus on me. And so for me, it felt like this huge weight had been lifted because I didn't have to micromanage anymore. And I didn't have to nag and remind and do any of that. I mean, he's a grown man. He knows how to take care of himself. He knew how to take care of himself before I ever entered the picture. And so it just felt like easier for me. It felt like, oh, I can finally breathe and not have to worry about whether he cleans up after himself. You know, I didn't have to be his mother anymore, which was good.
Yeah, what a relief, right? And so,
Mhm.
so you were doing the self-care and it sounds like you did a lot of relinquishing of control of his life. What else?
Mhm.
What other skills did you bring to your marriage?
Um, yeah, just respect. That respect was huge for him. And like those little things that I'd mentioned earlier that I thought I was being helpful, or, you know, are you really going to wear that? Or, you know, soda, you shouldn't be drinking that. It's not good for you. I mean, just letting those things go really improved his mood. And he felt like he could be accepted for who he was and that I wasn't mothering him and that we were equal partners rather than a mother and son. it was it was a weird relationship for a while. Yeah, no son is attracted to their mother in that
Right.
way. So it was just like he's like, "Ugh, I don't want to be around you." But yeah, after a while, he could see, and he would start to mention, like, "I see all the hard work and improvements you're doing, and I love that you're happier, and this just like brightens my whole day when I see you."
Oh,
So he would say things like that. It was so cute.
so did your husband change as you?
Yeah, yeah, he has. He's gotten way more responsible with like money. We were able to pay off our car recently because he's just wanted to get out of debt. Where before having more kids was like, no way, never going to happen. Now he's like coming around to the idea. So that's exciting. I've always wanted at least three. We have one right now, but he just was so turned off to that idea because I think our relationship was just terrible. He didn't want to bring more kids into a dysfunctional family. So, which was noble. It's a noble thing
Yeah.
because that's what I grew up in. It's a dysfunctional family and it kind of screwed me up a little bit. But yeah, I think he just finally came around and has been talking about when we can have another one and has been talking about getting a house or even possibly building a house. And so it's been so cool to watch. He calls me from work every day just to see how I'm doing.
Mm.
And he sends me little random text messages saying, "I love you," and "You're amazing. You two rock." And, you know, just like little things like that that are just that he never had done or very rarely had done before. And
Wow.
now it's just every day.
Sounds like you feel loved.
Yeah, I do. I do. And accepted. Yeah. We're just able to love each other, even though we are really different people and we have different opinions on different things. It's amazing.
So how about the fighting? That was going on a lot at your house before.
Yeah, it was bad. It doesn't happen as much anymore, hardly ever. There are times where I am not perfect and I forget that I'm not being as respectful as I should be or not taking the bait and just putting duct tape over my mouth. I don't do that sometimes because I do get fired up sometimes. But in those moments that we do have now, whereas before it would be days and days of not talking and, you know, not even acknowledging that the other existed, now it's we come back within an hour and just apologize and move on and have a great time. So the fighting really has like decreased dramatically. I would say it flip-flopped statistics where it was like a fight maybe like 5 or 6 times a week and to one good thing. And then now it's probably like 5 or 6 times a week of good stuff. And then one time a week of a fight, maybe.
Wow. That's fantastic. I mean, no marriage is perfect, and we are mere mortal women, but what a dramatic turnaround from having all that turmoil. It sounds like your house is mostly peaceful. Is that?
Yeah, it's definitely, it's that stability I was looking for. It's finally become that resting place, that safe haven that I've been wanting for so long, just to feel complete and happy.
Well, I give you all the credit for fixing it, Erica. That's amazing. How how about the depression and the anxiety? How's that?
It's good. I feel like I said before, a lot of counselors, I don't know, I don't want to be a blanket statement, but a lot of the counselors that I saw, it didn't really feel like they were as invested in me as I was. And I wanted to get better so bad. And I just felt like they were there for kind of the paycheck. And so once I started to take control and realize that this was in my power to change this and to uplift myself, and I still take medication every day, but once I found out that this was in my control and that I had the power to make whatever life I wanted, then it just became less of a problem. Whereas before it used to be this raging monster always next to me. Now it's more just like an annoying fly that kind of comes and goes, and it's less big. I don't know. It's gotten a lot smaller, and I'm able to confide in Tyler, my husband, in these things and talk to him and vent to him about certain things. And instead of before, he would be like, "Well, suck it up." Now it's
Oh.
more like, "I'm so sorry," and he'll give me a big hug. And yeah, before I would vent to him about how terrible he was being and stuff like that. But now it's other things, and because he's doing such a great job and I love him and he loves me, so it's great.
Wow. So it sounds like you're approaching with vulnerability. He sees your vulnerability and he wants to protect and care for that. And
Yeah.
because it's free of criticisms, it's pure, right? It's not I call it the accountable mess. Right. Whenever I'm the accountable mess, my husband just comes in and wants to protect and soothe and comfort. And sounds like Tyler's the same way.
Yeah, he is, he's great.
Yeah. Well, well done. Well done. What's your tip for a woman who's listening who's saying, like, we are fighting like crazy, we're separated, and I want to create that safe, stable, loving environment like Erica has. Where should she start? What's your best tip for her?
I would say learn to let go of all the control and focus on you. I know that's so cliche and like you hear it all the time, but it really has helped me a ton. I think, especially as a mom, I just forgot what I loved and what I wanted to do because I was so focused on taking care of this tiny human that needed me all the time. And yeah, just focusing on what I love to do and taking that time. Self-care is not selfish. It needs to be priority in your life, and you need to schedule that time. If you don't feel like you have that time, then you need to like pencil it in for yourself because it's huge. You can't serve others if you're not serving yourself first. That's what I think.
Might mean playing Nintendo games, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's a big one. And you just reminded me too. I didn't want to seeing this anniversary ring that I've heard about.
Oh yes, yep.
So tell us how this came out. Oh, it's beautiful. You can't see it because you're listening to a podcast.
Yeah.
It's got a beautiful sparkly ring.
Yes, it's very beautiful.
And how did that come about?
Yeah, he just wanted to do something special for 5 years. It's been 5 years and in January. And he said, "Hey, I really want to get you something special and something that you'll really love." And he brought up, a wedding band, which is something I would never really consider for myself. But he was just so excited about it. And I was like, why not? So we went to a local jeweler in town and he was like, what do you like? What looks good to you? And he was prepared to spend quite a bit of money. And of course, I'm more simple in my taste. And so I picked something a little bit cheaper, but still very beautiful. And I thought about doing, sapphires and diamonds because it is, my birthstone and his birthstone. And so, yeah, he was just super excited about it, over the moon. He came with me to the appointment to go get it sized and to get it designed and everything. And he was just so happy. Our daughter was a little bit jealous because she couldn't have one too, but she was like, I want one. We'll get you something from the dollar store or something.
Yeah.
It was funny.
Special for mommy. I mean, what an indication of his affection, right? His adoration.
It was an investment. Like he knew that we were going to be together and that he was celebrating that fact, as well as this is a promise to you that I'm sticking with you.
Oh, that must have melted you.
I know it did. It was so sweet. Like I said, not something I would have picked out for myself, but definitely appreciated. And I brag about it to everyone about it.
Yeah. And you received it graciously, which
I did.
Yeah. Beautiful job. What would you say to Erica from before, if knowing what you know now?
Oh man. First I would give her just the biggest hug, because I just know how lonely and how much pain she was in. And she just wanted the pain to end, and she couldn't see how to do it. I think I would just tell her, you're okay just as you are, and you don't need to be working so hard. Let go of the things that aren't serving you. Is, nagging Tyler about taking out the trash and doing menial things like that. Is that serving you, or is that just making you more stressed out? And just having her take an introspective moment and just letting go of all the things that aren't serving her.
Beautiful. Well, you are inspiring, Erica. It's incredible what you've accomplished. You saved your family, saved yourself, right? And I just hear tremendous healing. And I think, at the beginning you said, I thought this marriage was going to fix me. And in a way, I hear that it has.
It kind of has, yeah. But not in the way that I expected, and not in the way that I thought it would. It's not on him to fix me. It's on me. And it's not on me to fix his, bad mood or any of his bad habits or anything like that. I just love him for who he is, and he loves me for who I am. And that's the way that it should be.
Love really does heal.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, great job. Congratulations on all that you've accomplished. Really inspired. And it's wonderful to get to hear your whole story. Thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much.
If you'd like to be my guest on the Empowered Wife podcast and share about how you fixed a struggling relationship using the 6 intimacy skills, I would love to interview you. Just go to lauradoyle.org/podcast-guest to let me know that you are willing to make a big contribution to ending world divorce by telling your relationship story. I look forward to meeting you. That's lauradoyle.org/podcast-guest. And now it's time for the Worst Relationship Advice of the Week award.
It's the worst relationship advice of the worst relationship advice. Yeah, it's the worst relationship advice of the worst relationship advice of the week.
And the advice I find most outlandish this week is about how to identify a big problem in your marriage called emotional infidelity. According to an article by a couples therapist, cheating isn't always about a sexual encounter or secret flirtation or online erotic event. Fundamentally, it's about breaching trust. In other words, although their relationship is non-sexual, if your husband is frequently talking to any woman who isn't you about anything that's meaningful to him, he is being unfaithful, which means there's a big, big problem in your marriage that must be addressed. That's certainly one interpretation. It sure goes a long way toward creating drama and conflict where there doesn't need to be any. I remember one student sharing her story of how she decided her husband's friendship was an emotional affair, and she gave him an ultimatum about it. And that was a disaster for her. That turned out to be awful. But she turned it all around using the intimacy skills. So she goes into wonderful detail about it in episode number 49 of the Empowered Wife podcast. That's Ray. Ray shared her story, and she's the one that first kind of prompted me about this terrible advice. So this is your shout out, Ray. Thank you so much for contributing to this podcast by sharing worst advice. Now, of course, you want your husband to confide in you, to share his dreams with you, to have inside jokes and long talks with you. I mean, who doesn't that, right? And you want to feel special to him, of course. And you are. You're the one he married in front of God and everybody. And he talks to other people. He may even talk to one woman in particular a lot, way more than you want him to. And you could interpret it as a threat to your marriage that he's doing that. But what if he's just enjoying talking to someone else? What if it's just friendly banter? What if they have work interests in common or another mutual passion that isn't of much interest to you? How is him talking to her impacting you? Well, maybe it scares you that he's got such a strong connection to someone else, and you worry that it could become sexual at some point. Or maybe it's painful that he's more excited to talk to her than he is to talk to you. I completely get that. I know for me, it wasn't so much fun for my husband to talk to me in the bad days. I was full of complaints and insults and fear that he was going to let me down again. And that was painful for him. That made it so much harder for my husband to have deep conversations with me. It had everything to do with the lack of emotional safety at my house. I was quick to blame things outside of me that my husband was distant. It was because of the TV, or it was because something was wrong with my husband. But the real reason is that I was a porcupine wife. But even when there's emotional safety and a great connection at your house, your husband might be friendly with another woman. And you might ask yourself what you would get that you don't have now if he wasn't friendly with her. Maybe it seems like you would have peace of mind if he would just stop talking to her. I know for me, that peace of mind was an inside job. And trying to get my husband to change so I could have it never worked at all. What worked was getting my focus back on my own life, my own feelings, my desires, especially when I felt afraid. Dramatizing his friendships by calling it an emotional affair would have just been one more way I was criticizing and trying to control what he did, which is the opposite of what intimacy and connection need to thrive. For that reason, the advice to call your husband's friendship an emotional infidelity is the very worst relationship advice I have heard all week. Listen and subscribe to the Empowered Wife podcast. Next week, we'll talk about 3 ways to resolve conflicts quickly. In the meantime, I hope you're having lots of fun. Today's fun fact is that after I got my vaccine, I noticed my right arm was hurting a little. And then I remembered I got the shot in my left arm.